This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on India-China relations. The participants are B.S. Prakash, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Ambassador Prakash, when you look at the India-China relationship in a broader way, but you also look at what is happening for the last 1 month or so now with Indian and Chinese troops in a standoff in Doklam. We also see Ajit Doval travelling to Beijing, meeting the Chinese president, meeting his counterpart, holding talks. How do you look at the entire situation that is unfolding before us?
I think when we really look at what is happening today against a much larger background, let's try to frame this issue, the visit of the NSA, Mr. Ajit Doval. I think the fact that Mr. Ajit Doval went to Beijing is really for the BRICS National Security Advisors meeting. That in itself is an interesting phenomenon. Now here are these 4 countries of BRICS with very different national security kind of orientations. China and Russia, members of BRICS, are already nuclear states. India is a nuclear weapon state but not acknowledged internationally in the framework of the NPT. And Brazil and South Africa are 2 states which do not believe in nuclear weapons. Just to take one example. So there is so much of divergence. Similarly, on many other national security issues relating to conventional weapons, relating to their neighborhood, there are diverse interests. I'm just trying to frame it in these larger terms, Simran, because I think it's useful in a sense. So similarly, BRICS is a forum in which all these countries have some commonalities but many differences. It is obvious that this has given us an opportunity to really issue the current crisis troubling both India and China against a forum or a platform in which there was a certain commonality of interest. If we to see the meetings that took place in Beijing against that framework, now we are talking of the NSA's meeting with President Xi Jinping. In a technical sense, he did call on President Xi Jinping. But I think most of our listeners would have also seen pictures in the television. Can't really say that it is a meeting. I don't think it was a kind of a format in which they would be able to interact one-to-one or have a discussion. It was not a bilateral meeting. And we saw the 5 NSAs actually sitting in a big room at a broad table with the President of China, who in terms of protocol is at a very altogether different level. But with his counterpart, with the NSA of China, or the State Councillor as he is called, Mr. Yang, definitely, we don't know the details, but there would have been opportunities because they both would have discussed BRICS. And it is evident also from what we have been reading in the Chinese press agency that one of the ideas was about regional security, about bilateral issues. So I think both within the format of the meeting and separately there would have been opportunities. Now, in my view, it's not entirely surprising that so little has come out. And I would be very careful and not interpret it either positively or negatively. Because I think, as we all know, it's an extremely sensitive issue. It is not an issue that can easily be settled or resolved between 2 people, however senior they are, just off the cuff like that. So even if some kind of a forward movement had taken place, and we don't know this, or even if, let us say, there was an exchange in which they could not come eye to eye, or they did not have a meeting of minds. So I think we can speculate, we can theorize, and the media in both countries are doing it. In China, in Global Times, very aggressively, Xinhua more carefully, and there are some commentaries also which are more nuanced. In India too, there are some people who are belligerent, others more careful, and the governments, particularly our government, our official spokespeople, have been rather reticent, which is to be expected.
Ambassador Prakash, when you speak of the role of the media, as you said, the Global Times in China has been quite aggressive. It has even been hostile in some of the articles it wrote during the last 1 month on the Doklam crisis, even prior to Ajit Doval's visit, the signals coming from Global Times at least were very hostile, and they were very dismissive of any forward positive movement happening. As you said, Indian media there are voices which have been more aggressive, but we do see that there is a difference in the tone of the Indian government and the Chinese government. We had the Chinese foreign minister finally speaking up, and he also reiterated the strong line that China is taking, and he put it very bluntly that Indian troops need to withdraw. What do you make of this one particular position to which China seems to be sticking over the last 1 month? This almost a precondition that they seem to be putting on India, that Indian troops need to go back and then we will talk. Do you feel this is a practical, realistic approach by China?
I think it is again an attempt to frame the issue in those terms. Because from all that we have learnt now, when I say we, people like us who are external observers of the scene and who are trying to understand what is happening on the ground is one part of it. The background against which what has been happening is the second, and the larger motivations might be the third. When we put all that together, I think from our point of view, the way we see the situation has developed like this, that this is a sensitive and complicated region because after all it is a tri-junction, and here all the three, the Bhutanese, the Chinese and the Indian forces, we say close to each other in that sense, and what is happening is in Bhutanese territory. And what happened was, and because of treaty and because of mutual obligations and understanding going back a very long time, we are certainly a participant in this, though it is not our territory technically, but we are bound by these treaties and understandings also to be an interested party and to really help Bhutan defend its interests. And what has happened is that a road was being constructed in this area. This is our narrative. Now the Chinese are trying to frame it as something which is happening in their territory clearly. Or occasionally they say, is it disputed territory? They say it's either our territory or disputed territory. And therefore, the point that you made, Simran, or the question that you asked about framing it in a particular manner, saying that you first go back. So I see it as an issue in which you already gain certain advantages in any possible negotiation or even in understanding of the situation. If you start by saying that this is clearly our territory and something has been done to it and this is a kind of a intrusion or aggression, so then that becomes a precondition. In most conflicts they say that you go back and then we will talk about it. And we are saying that no, it's not a question of going back. You have changed the status quo. Because then we again go back to the essential understanding that we have had, the understanding on peace and tranquility, where there is a recognition that these things happen once in a while. They're regrettable, but we bump against each other. And what is required in this situation is to stabilize the situation, to keep the status quo, and then resume the negotiations or to come to talks. So in consonance with that, we are saying that, look, you change the status quo, so you are the ones who has to take the first step. And the Chinese are trying to reverse this. So that's one. Secondly, there are many commentators. Here I am not really conveying my view, but I am taking note of all the people who are saying that what the Global Times is doing is a kind of a psychological intimidation. It's a kind of, you make so much noise and you are so aggressive that you kind of try to intimidate psychologically, and I think it also in a sense goes with the point that I was making, that you're already calling somebody an aggressor and then you say this. The last point that I would like to make at this stage is that there is this feeling of hyper-nationalism on China's part. Not only here, but with regard to South China Sea, East China Sea, several other situations, a kind of a hyper-nationalism which the Global Times, according to experts, seem to manifest that. This may be because of their party congress which is coming up. This may be because the social media in China, all their Facebook and Twitter and all that, full of these young people who are saying now is our time and we have to assert our power. And there is this very great attachment to this territorial kind of aspects. So I think there may be a combination of factors or motives which, as I said, experts who have been writing about China, not only in India but elsewhere, have been talking about. So I think for all these reasons, that might be their style, their tactics, their posture. And ours is going back to the first principles, that we have always believed that, have the status quo and these problems have arisen, let's address it. So we are taking in that sense not a defensive position, but a very realistic for a change. Most of our media also seem to be more, shall I say, responsible rather than jingoistic. So that's how I would see the difference in style on both sides.
Ambassador Prakash, when you look at the rise of China in the last decade or so, we've seen China not just becoming very strong on the economic front. Globally, of course, they are the big economy. But China also seems to be very aggressive in its global ambitions. Then from the global ambitions, when you come to the region, China also seems to be very clear that it wants to exert influence in the South Asian region. It sees itself as the dominant force here. One example is the One Belt, One Road initiative, and they had a huge conference summit in Beijing in May, which India did not send a representative. When you look at the OBOR initiative and then you see the actions of China in South China Sea and now this latest Doklam crisis, would you say that there is a common thread running in all these things?
I would say that what you are saying, Simran, sounds very credible. I would not be saying it, but I think you have put it very well. I would put it somewhat differently. I think China thinks in terms of a certain hierarchy in the international order, thinks in terms of a power hegemony. And I think till, let us say, as you said, a decade back or so, and even today, China would say that very clearly the preponderant power in the world today is the US, the number one. Military, economic, technology, universities, research, development, all that. China would concede that. But China today very clearly feels that it is number two, and perhaps it is. And China started talking about a certain, not only being a part of the great powers, but a kind of a two-power system in the world and a kind of a special behavior that these hyperpowers or these two powers can exercise. I think in the recent years, many people have been writing about it. It has gone even beyond that. There is a certain aspiration and ambition on the part of China globally to catch up with the US. This is again what the experts write about. I am not saying such big things, but many people say that China wants to one day overtake the US, and economically they might. Militarily it will not be possible, but for a long time. So in that framework, in Asia, clearly they see themselves as number one and a dominant power. In the world, one of the two great powers, and in Asia, clearly the dominant power. And that includes Japan, it includes South Asia, East Asia, it includes every part of it. So in that framework, Bhutan, Doklam is a much smaller issue. But in terms of assertiveness, in terms of saying that we are capable and asserting their interests as they see it, it would be an example. So it may not have geostrategic significance on a large scale, but it certainly has in the region. And that we are coming to South Asia now, one unit below Asia, it would represent that.
Ambassador Prakash, do you see the standoff in Doklam affecting the overall relationship? India and China otherwise have had a very smooth relationship, the differences being there always, but we've managed this relationship pretty smoothly from both sides. Do you expect more bumps, as you put it, in the relationship because of what is happening in Doklam?
I think it's very difficult to be definitive about it at this point in time. I think Doklam certainly is a major challenge. We are trying to address it both sides. Depends on how it will turn out, because on the other hand, for instance, supposing it's resolved, may not be tomorrow, but it gets resolved satisfactorily, that will have its own effect on the relationship. But to be realistic, we have had some differences. It is also about the economic corridor, the OBR which you already mentioned. It is about some of our sensitivities not having been responded to, which includes the energy, the Masood Azhar. So there are half a dozen examples today ranging from irritants to more significant issue. Not everything is equally important, but cumulatively, I agree with you, there was a period in which there was much greater, shall we say, there seemed to be much greater understanding and bonhomie. Today, there are much greater sense of challenges and differences. So I think we should see how it turns out, and I would not hazard a guess as to how it will turn out in the coming days right now.
And we continue to follow the India-China developments, and with these thoughts, we bring the discussion to an end. Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India-China relations. The participants were B.S. Prakash, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.